and welcome. I'm Alexander.
I'm Simon.
And I am Haney.
We're Knee Deep in Tech, covering the latest from the IT industry with a specific focus on Microsoft and how to get actual value from technology. This is an episode number, but since we just managed to get out of our latest failure at ordering and numbering, this is just a special episode recorded for Data Toboggan. You will be able to find this and our previous episodes on kneedeepintech.com, iTunes, Spotify, and on most podcasting platforms. We're not alone today. I was about to say we picked up a stray, but that's kind of evil to say. We found Andy Cutler. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hello there. Hello. Thank you very much. Yes, firstly, I do feel bad for potentially mucking up the number sequence. That wasn't my intention. It really wasn't my intention. I was just purely selfish, been listening to the podcast, and then we've got a Synapse Analytics focused conference coming up. Knee Deep in Tech, talk a lot about Synapse conference, Knee Deep in Tech. So I reached out, and yeah, it's happening. We're doing it. So my name is Andy Cutler. So I'm an independent data warehouse consultant, and I work predominantly with Synapse Analytics, a freshly minted MVP. So I'm still working my head around all that at the moment. And yeah, we've got, our conference, Data Toboggan, where we're running a lot of Synapse Analytics content across, dedicated, serverless, Spark, Power BI, security. So yeah, it's really great to be, to be doing this podcast as well.
I think you missed one part, and I can see it in Haney's eyes. You missed networking.
I said, but does that not come under
security?
It comes under security, surely.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a discussion in itself, I would say.
I think it is indeed, yeah.
But since I'm the designated eager learner today, because I know very, very little about the topic that we're going to talk about, and I also know rather little about Data Toboggan. Could you tell us the story around that and what it really is before we head into the topic of today, and where I can start to ask all the questions I've always wanted to ask, but where Alexander and Haney never replies?
I can, Simon. Actually, I'm another interloper in Data Toboggan. So I was asked in to help out by Victoria, Mark, and Richard, who were the original, three people that started Data Toboggan, which was a purely Synapse Analytics only conference. So it was around 18 months ago. I think January 2021 was the first Data Toboggan. Then there was a summer edition. There was another conference later in the year, which was kind of billed as a little bit of an unconference. It was where, instead of these individual sessions where people turned up and talked about, here's how to do a thing in Dedicated, or here's what you do in Spark, it was more real world patterns and implementations and what people had actually been doing with Synapse. And that meant the good, the bad, the ugly, bring it all. Let's talk about it, because people are going to learn from what maybe hasn't worked, previously. And then, the lovely people at Data Toboggan reached out and said, hey, Andy, you do quite a bit of Synapse. Would you like to come on board, do all our admin, answer all our emails, get our teas and coffees, and do some organising as well. So, this is probably, I think this is the fifth conference that we've done now, and I think it's the first one. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the first one where we've gone to tracks, because there was more than enough across all these different features of Synapse. Because I rattled off dedicated and serverless, security and networking. We're going to keep those two separate. All of a sudden you get several sessions across each of those disciplines, and you've got quite a lot there to go through. So, last conference in January, there was quite a lot on machine learning and cognitive services integration. This conference, less so, but more on the dedicated SQL pools. So actually, we've seen content evolving over time. Now, before, in previous conferences, I've been surprised at the amount of machine learning, because I'm not really a machine learning person. So I view Synapse, as a data warehousing platform. I probably get my wrists slapped by Microsoft for saying that, but that's what I do for it. I couldn't really implement a machine learning solution in Synapse. So it's been really good to see how the sessions have evolved over time with all of these different facets of Synapse being brought to the front in each of the conferences. So this one, we've got quite a lot on dedicated. We've got some good sessions on security and networking as well. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one.
For sure.
Great.
I mean, does that make you you're not a machine learner?
Yes. I mean, it's probably a tautology there. But I try and avoid learning about machine learning, if I'm honest, because I get the feeling it's like an iceberg. I'd love to be able to, to just use auto ML in Synapse or machine learning and create a model and say, there you go, I've predicted all of the fantasy football scores and can I have some money now? But I sort of hang back and let the experts deal with the ML side of things.
Yeah, when I kind of talked to Terry McCann about exactly that and told him about my wonderful idea to do this for football or soccer or whatever, he just smiled and walked away. I don't know why.
Probably because you said football, and that means that it probably weren't you at your senses at the time. But I'm just speculating here.
Sports ball?
Exactly. Good, Alexander. So let's, before we head into this, we had an episode 201, where we talked about...
We've had a lot of episodes.
Oh, yeah, we had. But this particular episode, we talked a lot about naming. So first, is it Azure Synapse or Azure Synapse Analytics? Is it two different things? Or is it the same thing with just two different names, which would be typical Microsoft?
It's the same thing, and we say Synapse because we're lazy. It's technically Azure Synapse Analytics. But yeah, it kind of doesn't really roll off the tongue, I'd say.
You mean like Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform does?
You had to go there. You had to go there, Simon.
Yeah.
Okay.
And before we talk more about what it can and can't do, so while we're on the topic of the naming, is Azure Synapse a product, a brand, a platform, or an animal?
Or an animal?
Yeah,
I think we can strike out the animal part, but I'm curious to hear your view on the rest.
Maybe strike out the brand as well, because as we know, Microsoft, they do like, Monday morning 9 a.m. rubbing their hands with glee about renaming things. Yeah. So with brands, Synapse I very much see as a platform. Yes, they brought various features in, but that whole ecosystem of those different features, I'd say definitely a platform, because you could see any one of those technologies going off somewhere else, and then it doesn't really kind of fit with a brand. So I'm going to stake my claim and say it's definitely a platform.
Do the other
agree
of
with
you
that.
agree? Yeah, you agree.
Yeah, I would agree. I know Alexander has stated something else in the past, and I have disagreed loudly. That at least it brings something to the table in addition to just the individual parts.
So I'm going to run with this. Is it a platform or is it a service?
Ooh.
What's our definition of a service, and what's our definition of a platform?
Exactly.
So, I mean, when we talk about platform as a service, the thing that pops into my head is Azure SQL Server, right? That's a platform as a service. But, and if you were to look at serverless pool, that would be a platform as a service, or a dedicated pool, that would be a platform as a service. But those are just parts of Azure Synapse Analytics, which in turn makes Azure Synapse Analytics into what? A software as a service? Or is it a platform as a service? I know what I think, but I also know what marketing thinks.
Oh yeah, but we can disregard what Microsoft marketing thinks.
Yeah.
We're the ones that use it, so we can tell the truth. But all of those components are, yes, they're all platform as a service components. So I would still say it's a platform as a service. I'd still sell it in as a platform as a service. I wouldn't want to confuse my, local friendly CTO or CIO and start trying to aggregate platform as a service up into just a service. I'd still just keep it as platform as a service. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's so much flexibility to what you use and what you don't use out of Synapse Analytics. And you can, customize it quite a bit that is not typical for a software as a service offering either.
Sure, but on the other side of that coin is the fact that it's integrated. Everything inside of the Synapse box really works together fairly well for most of the time.
I might throw into something here, but could you leverage Azure Synapse without anything else? Would it create any value if you weren't to integrate it with any other service?
Yes.
Yes. Then
You need Azure Data Lake. Azure Data Lake is not part of Synapse.
That's a really good point. Okay, if we're going to go down that path, you're going to need Azure AD as well. And that's not part of Synapse either. So, disregard what I just said. Listen to her instead. Most people do.
But if you were just using dedicated, though, you could just about get away.
That's true.
You could just, if you didn't want to follow any sort of, if you didn't want to stage your data in the data lake, if you just wanted to grab it from the sources and get it into dedicated, you maybe could just about get away with it. Wouldn't
mostly
be
because
pretty.
Dedicated was the only thing that actually existed before Synapse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we can probably get back to this and talk about it all day long, but I wanted to take a trip back memory lane first, because I was trying to find the episode where we first spoke about Azure Synapse Analytics when it was released at Microsoft Ignite 2019, and I couldn't. So everyone that are watching this, please listen to episode 89 until 96 to find where we talk about Synapse. It's a lot of fun. It's where we give Sami the penguin and all of that. So you will have fun until you find it. And I have found the release notes. And marketing did a great job here. Simply unmatched, truly limitless, announcing Azure Synapse Analytics. They are promising quite astonishing things here, I would say. And I do think that I remember that we, in that episode, compared Azure Synapse to Azure Arc as being the Azure Arc for data. Was that true at all? Or is that a completely different thing?
I'm going to say a completely different thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm probably getting out of my depth here with Azure Arc. I think was it Ben Weissman who co-wrote a book on Azure Arc, which is essentially integrating your on-premises and your cloud databases. So I guess in a way, Synapse, yes, it does integrate data. I mean, with big quotes around it. But yeah, it's a different animal, I think. Yeah, we're getting
so it
back
is
to
an
animals now, but it is definitely it's a different animal.
Yeah. So now when we have concluded that, then I need to ask you, simply unmatched, truly limitless.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in with the term limitless.
Yeah.
Okay, because before this podcast, I was just going through a couple of updates, just to make sure that, if you ask me, oh, is there anything, anything new? I'd be able to say, oh, yes, we can do this. So there has been a limit change in serverless SQL pools, which has caused some issues with some people where you get an insufficient, memory error in a limitless service. It turns out there are limits, okay? And and also it turns out that when you try and sell Synapse in, that the people that you're trying to sell it into are very grateful if you tell them what the limits are so that they can plan for that. So yes, limit. I have issue with limitless. I get the grandiose gesture in which it's meant, and I get the spirit in which it's meant, but there are limits. So that's my take.
Yep.
And we need to remember that when this was released in 2019, the only thing that existed was SQL Data Warehouse with a new coat of paint. So it's kind of a stretch to call that limitless. It's pretty darn powerful, but it's not limitless. So I was thinking limitless, clueless, hopeless in some ways. Some days that's what I see Synapse as, sort of a hopeless idea that perpetually being worked on. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yeah,
I always tend to think that it's a step behind what it should be. At any point in time, it's just that little, a little bit behind what it should be. But, as Simon, you talked about going back in time and looking at where the product had come from. I mean, yes, it's evolved, right? Dedicated SQL pools used to be called Azure SQL Data Warehouse. That used to be the on-premise appliance with separated, compute and storage nodes. And in fact, the data management views, the DMVs, still reference that old naming convention of the parallel data warehouse, PDW. Yeah, so it's evolved, but it hasn't. Microsoft didn't stop and say, right, okay, we're going to completely redesign a cloud data warehouse. They just took an existing appliance and migrated it, and it worked. 2016 was the first time that I'd used Azure SQL Data Warehouse, migrated from a vendor. I won't name the vendor, but it was a non-Microsoft vendor to dedicated SQL pools. There was a lot to learn about how you distributed data. Not every single way of distributing data fitted every single query that you'd want to issue against that data warehouse. So it has kind of evolved, but because we've got new vendors, we've got Snowflake, we've got, or Databricks have, had skin in the game now for a decade. I'm not much of a Spark person, so their origins I'm probably a little bit fuzzy on, but they've brought features that Synapse doesn't have. We go through this perpetual discussion around the auto pause, auto resume, auto scale. Okay, my most requested and desired feature in dedicated. Why don't we have it? I mean, it's a rhetorical question, but it's something that consumers now and organizations have kind of expected. They're like, okay, we're sizing our workloads to meet what the demands of those workloads, but minute by minute, that's going to change. Okay. Now, yes, you can scale dedicated up and down, but it's, you've got to introduce other Azure services to do that for you. I mean, even something in Synapse Studio or through the Azure portal where you can just go through a little next exercise to say, please scale my data warehouse to this, then switch it off, then switch it back on again. There hasn't really been that,
So
I agree.
So when we are on the topic of integrations, and we have already started to talk about features that we would like to see and how it would behave and all of that. This question is for all three of you because you work in slightly different areas of the data sphere, so to say. So in your role, Alexander, Haney, and Andy, what value does Synapse bring to the customers you work with? How do you actually use it? And as we say in the intro, how does it bring value by adding this technology?
And who do you think should go first?
Since you haven't spoken and I know that it hurts you that you haven't said enough words yet, I would say that you can start.
Thank you, Simon. No, so the first thing that I need to say about Synapse is how do you sell something? Well, you under-promise and then you overachieve. That's how you make people super happy. Synapse doesn't do that. Synapse overpromises and underachieves. It sucks because the idea is phenomenal. The tooling is the ideas of the people inside of Microsoft. Holy crap, the size of their people's brains. There's so many opportunities that just beyond our grasp. But to answer your actual question, I use a lot of the bits and pieces inside of Synapse. What I like the most with Synapse is that it's integrated. And for the most part, the integrated stuff really, really works. And when it works, it's wonderful. When it doesn't work, it's a pain in the posterior because trying to troubleshoot the security aspects of a broken Synapse installation, not so much fun. But that is rare these days. It used to be often, but now it's rare. So I use the dedicated pool for specific use cases. It's an extremely powerful tool that tends to be overused, especially outside of Europe. Sure, if you have the money, go for it. But if you don't, you might want to be a bit careful with how you use it. Serverless pools, holy crap. I could list the opportunities and the ideas for days. I just wish that it would be more consistent. It has a tendency to fall over. It has a tendency to give me crappy performance. And a question that I'm going to pose to all of you in a bit is, how do you troubleshoot something that is essentially outside of your grasp? And then we have the other parts, Synapse pipelines. I like Synapse pipelines. I don't understand why Synapse pipelines and Azure Data Factory is not the same thing. But yeah, I tend to use most parts. The thing that I use the least, I was about to say the thing that I use the least is Spark. That's not true because I use Custo even less. In fact, I've never used Data Explorer in production. I've toyed with it, but so far I've not found a use case that fits for me. Then again, I don't have a lot of customers that do heavy lifting when it comes to log analytics and really heavy stuff for Cisco or intrusion detection or whatnot. The Spark stuff, I don't do enough, I think. But we're also kind of back to, why do I need to manually manage the Spark cluster? Hello, it's 2022. Why aren't we looking at a serverless solution for Spark? Because when we do, holy cow, we're going to have a lot of fun with just the power of Spark. So yeah, that's probably what I use it for.
Amy?
Well, I kind of fall more on the DevOps side of things. So I grapple with the security and networking and access control and making use of different environments easy, and then taking your environments from your development to production and so forth. So I've kind of moved a little more away from the data layer of things. But how I do, of course, see customers using and getting the benefit from Synapse is having that integrated system where you have options of how you can work with your data. And I think that you have different tools that you can use to work with the same data, that is kind of one of the most powerful aspects of it, because you can make the more traditional DBAs happy, or the people who use SQL language, and then you can make also, you know, the data scientists who are used to working with Spark very happy as well.
The cool people.
But actually setting up this integrated system and getting networking to work, etc. Like, it's gotten better and it's not as much of a hassle as it was. But still, I sometimes wonder, why isn't it more abstracted? Since it is a packaged system, then why don't they like fully wrap it so that you do not really have to care about it so much? But maybe it's heading that way, not sure. It has been taking steps towards, less steps that you need to take to get everything working. So I hope it keeps heading that way as well.
And then, Andy, since this is what you do every day of the week, how do you use it?
Well, so current project is not Synapse related. Yeah, it's more SQL Server related at the moment. The current project I'm working on, but dedicated SQL pools. That's been first and foremost. We're talking footprints of around 3 to 4 terabytes, really. Because, I think, as Alexander said, dedicated has maybe been used too much as a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. The one thing that people constantly ask around is data volumes. At what stage should I start looking at dedicated or using serverless? So, projects with dedicated, yes, I had a little bit of a moan about the auto pause and auto resume, but ultimately, workloads, overnight during the day are fairly plannable, I would say, if it's plannable is a word. So we've been able to sort of mitigate the fact it doesn't really auto scale and things like that. And generally, yes, we've been able to resume, scale, and meet the kind of workload demands. I mean, it takes a few minutes to, change a tier, which is not the end of the world if you've planned that during the day. But of course, dedicated is not too far of a stretch from implementing, a data warehouse using SQL Server. Yes, you've got to worry about data distribution. Not all features are supported. We still shouldn't use the merge statement. So there are some things that it's a lot more comfortable to go to dedicated. But with serverless, I get quite a few work requests. I get quite a few emails coming in saying, we've got data coming out of Dynamics. We've got data that we're augmenting from a telemetry system. We've got data that's coming in from this, from this area. We maybe want some of it to go into the data warehouse, and some of it actually is. We've got a loading process to do this, that, and the other, but we know we can unlock X amount of potential if we could just get at it and query it somehow, and then I get asked about serverless. I get asked about, can you change cluster sizes, or can you do this and can you do that? So with serverless, yes, as Alexander says, there's been a few performance hiccups. I'd like to say that the performance hiccup we experienced recently was as a result of them increasing the limit on the limitless service. So I'm gonna, I'll give them a buy for that. But more people are interested in not having to move data around unnecessarily, which is what serverless can do. Yeah, it's still, you're still able to implement, a data engineering process. It doesn't circumvent that. One of the things that I think, I'm not going to say Microsoft have been a little bit naughty with, but they've implemented a change in which you don't have to specify data types in serverless. Okay, to get the best performance. It's going to automatically do that for you. And in fact, a little while ago, I was going to do a blog, I was going to do a video on the importance of doing it. Microsoft must have flicked the switch and implemented this feature, because all of a sudden, both my queries, the bad query and the good query, were running at the same fast speed. So I was just scratching my head thinking, what on earth's going on here? And as it turns out, they've implemented this clever auto schema discovery. As a side note, always declare the data types you're working with. I'm gonna say that. But people are more and more interested about using serverless because of its support for Parquet Delta, because of its support for Delta. Like Delta, the Delta format is really starting to make headway in all sorts of platforms and all sorts of technologies as this disconnected transactional data store. Yes, serverless, it doesn't support a lot of Delta features, and because Microsoft are implementing the OSS version of Delta, Databricks is probably always going to be a slight step ahead in terms of using Delta. But people are now putting these pieces together. Serverless, Microsoft stated in their documentation 3 use cases. Use it for ad hoc analysis. I don't really see many people doing that. Use it as a logical data warehouse. That's what people are using it for. They're using it as a serving layer. Yeah, they're not using it to do any data engineering, which is the third scenario. They're using it to cast some structure over that pre-prepared data and then hooking in their SQL clients, their Power BI. Because its limitations probably means it's actually fairly easy or relatively straightforward to implement. So I've definitely seen that sliding scale go up in terms of serverless usage.
I'm curious. You said that you don't see people use it for data engineering.
Transformation of data. When I started to speak about serverless, 18 months ago, I started to talk about how it was being used as an engine to process data for something like Power BI, as a pass-through service, okay? And then it evolved more into the kind of logical data warehousing that I've seen more and more people do. So yes, there's still, and in fact, one of the new released features in Power BI, Data Marts, has sort of reignited the data engineering aspect of using serverless, because whereas before you had, let's say lots of data in your data lake and you had Power BI, you can put serverless in the middle to crunch that data down and pipe it into Power BI. Data Marts, they give us another place to store data in which maybe serverless is doing some of that data engineering, but not having to reduce it so much. I mean, what's the limit? 100 gig for a data mart. So we still see some data engineering aspects, but I see a lot more requests and a lot more desire to use it as a logical data warehousing service.
Yeah, makes sense. So the one thing that I really think is lacking from serverless is writing Delta, because the only way to write Delta is through Spark. And come on, it can't be that hard. So I'm longing for the day when serverless or something similar will be able to write Delta, because I think that's going to open up so many opportunities down the line.
That's probably a longer conversation. I mean, I still with serverless, I kind of want to keep it pure and simple. If you start introducing a lot of data engineering aspects to it, there may be some confusion there in how or what technologies you should be using to write the data out. As I said, serverless being used as the kind of serving layer, it does work really well, but it would be quite useful to be able to issue insert and update statements using SQL in partitions in your data lake and writing that out. But I mean, even the CTAS process, the create external table as select process, I mean, it's incredibly rudimentary. You have no control over the number of files it creates, nothing to do with partitioning. You can't do anything like that. It's just, I'm just going to dump this data out into a folder and then you can deal with it later. That's the kind of that's the current implementation. Will it change? Don't know.
Oh, I'm sure it will change. We just don't know how. But this is a perfect segue, and I'm super curious to hear, Henny, in your opinion, And Simon, I want to hear your thoughts on this too, because this is probably applicable to what we call your side of the fence as well. We've already touched on it. With Synapse Serverless, there are a gazillion ways to solve a problem. And that's a problem in itself. There are literally many, many ways of solving the same problem. It is extremely difficult to figure out which solution is the best. I mean, the answer is always going to be it depends, but I would love for us to see more concrete examples. If this is your thing you want to solve, this is what you can do, this is what you can do, and in this case, serverless might not be the option. You might want to go for pipelines or God knows what. So starting with Haney, what's your view on what we have in Synapse?
Sorry, I don't think I exactly understood the actual question. What is the question?
What's your take on the gazillion ways of solving issues instead of having these fairly small number of ways of doing something and having them very well documented?
Well, isn't that true for all of Azure? You have like multiple different services you can run any solution on in Azure. And the thing is that it brings flexibility. So especially if you have some existing solutions in place, then you are able to go towards the bits and pieces that, for example, your team is most familiar with. So if they've been using a lot of Spark, you can stick with Spark and have less emphasis on the SQL side, for example, or the other way around. So it gives flexibility, but I think for people who are just getting started and haven't had maybe like a data platform solution before, it can be overwhelming. And it can almost like cause this paralysis where you don't know even where to start because there's so many options. So I do also think that having some kind of like a best practices, quick start type of templates for people to use would make it easier to get started.
And this
I always like the flexibility and the options personally, but that's also me. I like puzzles, so I like to figure out what's the best piece. So
I've seen some of your puzzles. I believe you. So and this I think is where we kind of trip over marketing, because as you said, this is the way that Azure works. You can take, Azure is like a huge box of Legos. You can pick and choose essentially wherever you want and you can put it together. You're still using just Synapse, and Synapse is marketed as this integrated tool, singular, meaning that first you manage to find someone to decide, yes, we're going to do this in Synapse. And then you realize, holy crap, there's a million ways of doing it inside of Synapse. So I think we have some ways to go here. Andy, what's your take on this?
So I tell you what, I'm going to follow on from what Haney said around how, you know, an organization or just an individual can kind of get in and start using it, because one of the things that Microsoft provide is the Architecture Center. And I blogged about it before, and I tell you what, well, I'm glad I did the blog, but about halfway through it, I started thinking, oh my word, okay, there's quite a lot here. If I came to this Architecture Center completely cold and went, right, okay, Microsoft, you tell me how to implement this. Just do, just like row after row after row after row after row. It's, you know, if you think Synapse is overwhelming, wait until you get into the Architecture Center, because that is a mind blower. It really is. But what Microsoft have done, and it existed on a Git repo, one of Microsoft's Git repo, was their success by design. So they authored a set of, well, originally these were just ebooks, just downloadable ebooks around dedicated serverless and Spark, in which they went through how to run a proof of concept for each of those services. You know, if you'd identified that, yep, this workload is a Spark workload, you had a resource to go down. And they worked through with you how you set your goals in your proof of concept, you know, how you plan the project, how you evaluate the data that you're going to be using, setting your timelines, you know, and your expectations. So sort of bringing in lots of areas of maybe some project management, but still keeping it into quite a short time frame, kind of holding your hand through this process. They incorporated that into the guidance section of the Synapse documentation on Microsoft Docs. And I think that success by design was because people turned around and said, so how do we get started? What do I use each bit of technology for? However, to answer the overall question, it's a bit like chicken and the egg. I know when to use dedicated and when to use serverless and when I should ask someone else to do Spark. But how did I know that? It's like a sort of a learning process of a bit of technology existing before, then something new coming along. Someone coming into this cold, they're either going to need to spend an awful lot of time in that documentation, or just ask someone who's already done it before.
What if there was a conference only doing Synapse Analytics?
Then
wouldn't be that like, wow?
Those people should be given a ton of sponsorship money, and
yeah, I have to agree.
But I also feel that with something like Data Toboggan, is that there's lots of different aspects to Synapse, and yes, we've got different sessions to cover those those different aspects. But what I would like to do in the future is that concept of a track. Yeah. So there's too much to cover in one session with dedicated. Yes, we've got tips and tricks and things like that. But where you've got, things like SQL bits, precons, or, pass precons, where you've got a data engineering track and you've got 8 hours to learn, and go through, the logical ordering of that platform. That's kind of where this should go, really. You can kind of dip your toes into little parts of Synapse in with these sessions, but a track, definitely in the future, I think that's where we want to go to.
Indeed. So Simon, what's your view on this from the other side, so to speak?
Yes, so as you usually do, you ask a question that you don't expect a clever response on, and then you get it. So good try. But I was also thinking about the session we did with Gregor Suttie a while back, episode 177. I have no clue what episode number that really is, but still, where we spoke about the concept of scenarios within the docs. And I think that could be something to add to this discussion as well. But I also do think that when I work, I primarily use SaaS services or ready-made solutions. I'm usually not down on the individual infrastructure components layer. So I have already ready-made pieces. I have my Lego boxes done. They have all the pieces I need to build exactly what I want, and it's only one way to do it right. Then when I'm creating a Lego city, then it's important that I understand how to combine these Lego boxes. But I do think what you three are doing, you are the ones that are designing the content of the Lego boxes, which gives you infinite opportunities. So I think that's...
To mess up.
But I've only experienced once that I've missed a Lego piece in a Lego box. So try to be like Lego, please.
Well, see, one of the questions that I put on Twitter a while ago was around the networking aspect. I said, right, who's, because a lot of the people that I follow and follow me are data professionals. So I've been diving in a lot more into the networking aspects of Synapse, sort of obsessed with locking down Synapse so that so that unauthorized access, you can't get in, but also you can't get the data out. And I did ask the question. I said, so, right, who's doing this? Who's doing the networking? And people came back and said, yeah, we've got clients, doing, the networking. So that Venn diagram of the data engineers understanding some of the networking aspects, and what Haney was talking about, making that networking a little bit more integrated and simplified in Synapse, that that Lego that Lego model being there ready to go, because there are some considerations in how that networking works, and I would like that implementation to be a little simpler. Yeah, because there's those concepts of private endpoints and managed private endpoints. And to be honest with you, as a data engineer, I mean, I have my opinion on this, is that, yes, okay, I understand it a little bit, but I don't, I'm busy trying to reshape all this data into something meaningful. I don't have time to be worried about data exfiltration. So maybe those building blocks of security would be beneficial as well.
Yeah,
but if we continue with
agree.
that, sorry.
Yeah,
But if we then
I just have
continue
to.
with, but now I will be silent. Go ahead, Haney.
Yeah, especially on the networking side, there's been some improvements, but it is still a little bit like you have to tweak it for the different parts of Synapse. Like you have considerations you need to have when using the pipelines and the integration runtimes. And then you have the private endpoints for the SQL pools, but not the Spark pools. Surprise, surprise. Why do you need to know that there is no private endpoint or that there are private endpoints for the SQLs? Can't you just say, hey, I want private networking?
Yeah. And I do think
Maybe someday.
just to sum up the Lego story there, like a modern day Lego box set consists of small bags with all the pieces you need to build a specific component of the bigger set. When I was young, when basically at the time Alexander got old, we didn't have that. We had like a lot of loose pieces inside of the Lego box.
No,
so we had to
Simon,
figure
that
it
was
out.
because you only work with Duplo Legos.
Oh. Yeah, but I do think that what you're asking for, both Andy and Haney, is really the opportunity to get a ready-made module of Lego pieces, but where you want to combine that with either loose parts or other bags of Lego.
And that's exactly where I see community coming in, creating these scenarios or components or whatever you want to call them.
And since we have promised not to overrun on time, which I have a too small screen to see if we are or not, so I have no clue if we have or not. But I think it's time to wrap up. Yeah, of course we have. But I've learned a lot. But if you, each and every one of you, could send one last bit of advice for people that want to use Synapse or continue to use Synapse, and keep it short, please, what would that be?
Ooh. Well, I'll go first.
Yeah.
I'll go first. So, I mean, with Synapse, yes, because you've got all these different services, and it would be, it's probably a little bit unwise to just go off and try and use all of those services. Even before you get to Synapse, is just understand, well, what's the workload that you're working with? What's the size of the data that you've got? And how do you want to distribute it to, your organization? And then the right component in Synapse will kind of pop up. It'll emerge. Yes, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I'd say if you're not quite sure what you're going to start doing with Synapse, then the other approach is to just kind of get some data into your data lake in Azure and start playing. And then you can just start with the components that you have kind of out of the box when you put a Synapse Analytics workspace up. So you get the serverless SQL pools and the pipelines, and you are kind of ready to go. And you can just get some hands-on experience and get a feel for the entire product. And then maybe also clarify like what are the use cases that you actually want to work with.
And I want to add to both of you saying that Synapse is a tool. It's a fantastic tool. It does a lot of amazing things. Don't forget the basics. It's still the same way of designing things. It's still the same way of approaching data. That never changes. And keep that mindset when you start playing with Synapse. Yes, it's a Formula One car, but if you put it on a bike lane, it is going to suck.
And with that, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And an extra thank you to Andy for putting up with us for this long. I think that might be the longest time someone has put up with us ever.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's been great.
It was amazing to get invited because we've talked about this and we've pitched doing a live session, live episode, if you will, on a conference. But so far, nobody in their right mind, which I think is a good thing, has decided to go for it. But you did.
Which means I'm not in my right mind. And I think that's perfect. I think it's worked really well.
I think so. And on that bombshell, it is definitely time to end. So again, thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of Data Toboggan. I know that I will. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.